Thank you for joining us today for the Potential Applicant Webinar, Cancer Prevention Clinical Trials Network, CP-CTNet DMACC. My name is Jennifer Leidenberger, and I will be your WebEx host. Before I move into introducing our speaker for today, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. Send your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A or chat panel and select all panelists from the drop-down. We will ask them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Question-specific aims will not be addressed during the webinar. If you view live closed captioning, please refer to the Media Viewer panel. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online in the near future. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Eva Sabo.
Thank you. So before I begin, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I also want to apologize for those who listened to the previous webinar for RFA CA 18029. You will see many of the same slides, and hopefully I will say the same things about the slides. We're going to go to the background and overview of this RFA, and then there'll be a question and answer session. We received many questions already, and so we will address those, but please send in more. We'll not address questions about specific aims or individual grant applications. So, development of cancer preventive agents requires a very prolonged and phase-based approach. There needs to be good rationale and preclinical evidence for the use of specific agents, a robust toxicology package. The early phase clinical trials need to address safety and provide evidence of potential efficacy, and then phase 3 studies will determine whether there is actual efficacy, and hopefully these interventions will move into general usage. The Division of Cancer Prevention, or DCP, maintains programs in all 3 of these phases of drug development. The preclinical program, known as Prevent, develops the biologic rationale, identifies molecular targets, and identifies the preclinical efficacy, does the toxicology. The clinical program, or the early phase clinical program, examines the safety and preliminary efficacy through phase 0 through 2 clinical trials. This is the focus of the current phase. And then phase 3 definitive efficacy trials are performed by the ENCORE program. Prevention Clinical Trials Network, which is the focus of the current funding announcement, aims to qualify cancer preventive agents for further clinical development through these early phases, phase 0 through 2 clinical trials that assess efficacy and safety. This is a work in progress in the field of cancer prevention. We also aim to optimize clinical trial designs, to develop surrogate intermediate endpoint biomarkers, to test novel imaging technologies, and to develop further insights into mechanisms of cancer prevention by strategies that are being studied. Our current program is funded by contracts as 5 main contractors, but more than 100 member sites. This is going to be replaced by the CP-CTNet, which will consist of 5 UG1 funded sites. Those were the focus of the prior webinar. The site will consist of the lead academic organizations, or AOs, and affiliated organizations. And then there will be a U24 Cooperative Agreement funded data management, auditing, and coordinating center. And that is the focus of the current webinar. Types of studies that will be performed are phase 0 microdosing biomarker modulation trials, 1 pharmacokinetic and safety trials, finding dose for instance, phase 2 preliminary efficacy trials, which may or may not be placebo-controlled, and will fall into many different categories. These include pre-malignancy endpoint trials that require screening and biopsy to identify individuals who actually harbor pre-malignant lesions, endpoint trials, which require less rigorous screening, pre-surgical or window of opportunity trials, and others as well. Areas of emphasis for the DCP clinical trials program has included novel scientific areas such as immunoprevention, strategies to optimize risk benefits so that we can take effective agents and actually make them usable, for instance, by regional drug delivery, by alternative dosing regimens that decrease toxicity, by combinations that increase efficacy. We're also interested in drugs that affect multiple chronic diseases, and thus repurposing of old drugs that are effective in other chronic diseases has been an area of intense interest in the entire community. I do want to emphasize that these areas of interest should not be viewed as limiting to any proposed applications. So this RFA, the two RFAs for these announcements, propose the following structure, which is the program will consist of the 5 UG1 funded lead academic organizations and their affiliated sites, which will develop study ideas, conduct the studies, perform the statistics, enrollment, and fiscal management oversight. And the coordinating center, and there will be one of these, funded by a U24 Cooperative grant mechanism, and the coordinating center will be responsible for data management, housing the database of record, for auditing all the sites, and for general clinical operations across the network. DP will provide study ideas, will review the letters of intent and protocols, various documents, will sponsor the INDs, will aid in the drug obtaining drugs and distribution process, and will provide oversight and compliance. These are key changes from our previous contract-funded program. Now we have a grant cooperative agreement mechanism with much more centralized coordination, one management system, and even some restricted funds for inter-network and high-priority new studies. So the goal is to have more of a network approach to this than isolated sites as we had in our previous contract-funded program. The Data Management Auditing and Coordinating Center, which will be funded by U24, is aimed to support the CP-CTNet sites and coordinate trans-network activities. There will be centralized data management and data reporting, centralized clinical trial auditing, and administrative and logistical coordination across the CP-CTNet sites. The DMACC will also provide an advisory role in trial development and the primary statistical role in cross-network clinical trials. How the CP-CTNet sites will mainly develop and conduct the clinical trials. For the DMACC are as follows. It will provide centralized data management using metadata RAVE as the NCI designated clinical data management system of record. It will provide data management support for tracking and improving participant accrual in CP-CTNet files. It will develop and maintain the virtual biospecimen data inventory system. It will conduct independent auditing of the clinical trial data and processes at the CP-CTNet sites. It will provide administrative and logistical coordination across the work and support the development, presentation, and dissemination of educational materials as needed for the CP-CTNet recruitment and retention activities. There will also be trans-network activities, and the DMACC will be an integral component of this. It will need to interact closely with the CP-CTNet sites, such as the LAOs and AOs. It will provide an advisory role for clinical trial development and primary statistical role for the cross-network clinical trials. DMACC PIs will also participate in the steering committee, which will be formed for representatives of all the CP-CTNet authorities, both at the UG1s and U24, along with NCI participation, and this will be a self-governing body for network. NCI will support additional resources that are beyond the scope of the CP-CTNet FOAs, which include regulatory support, including IND applications and FDA reporting, agent acquisition, packaging, and distribution, a central institutional review board, a CIRB, which is required for all NCI trials, and the protocol, DCP Protocol Information Office, which will receive protocols, manage all kinds of documents, coordinate the review and approval process across the network. This award mechanism is a resource-related research project cooperative agreement, clinical trial required. What does that mean? So clinical research is defined by NIH. In brief, this involves direct interaction with human subjects to study mechanisms of human disease, therapeutic interventions, clinical trials, or development of new technologies. Cooperative agreement means that after award, NCI scientific or program staff will assist, guide, coordinate, or participate in project activities. The U24 definition is meant to support research projects contributing to improvement of the capability of resources to serve biomedical research. This is a definition that I did not come up with. Clinical trial required indicates that these grants include the conduct of studies that meet NIH clinical trials definition. Of course, clinical trials will be performed at the UG1 sites, not within the DMACC proper. A few things that I want to remind you of. The application budgets are limited. It's $1.25 million direct costs in year 1 and $1.9 million direct costs in years 2 through 5. Request a 5-year project period, which is the length of this program. Letter of intent is requested, but it is not required. However, it does help in our planning, and so we would appreciate it if you would submit it. Applications must follow specific instructions. So please make sure to read the entire funding announcement and all the important information that you find in the SF424 R&R application guide. I also want to remind people that the PDs and PIs on this application must not be named senior key personnel or other significant contributors on applications to the companion FOA, the RFA CA029, which is for the CP-CTNet sites. The institutions can apply to both of the FOAs, but the research teams must be completely separate and not overlapping. For the CP-CTNet applications are as follows. The RFA was released on September 14th. The letters of intent, which are not required, are due on October 15th. The applications are due on November 15th, and there will be no late applications accepted. Scientific merit review will be done in late winter, somewhere in the February through April time period, and the awards should be made by August of 2019. So the anticipated period of performance will be August 1st, 2019 through July 31st, 2024. Listing here some additional resources regarding NIH grants and funding, the application process. The CP-CTNet site for potential applicants is cited in the RFA itself. It has much information that will help you submit your applications. The awarded RFA webinars and frequently asked questions, FAQs, will be posted at the site in the near future, and the FAQs will be updated as new questions are received. There is an email for CP-CTNet program, DCP program staff, and it is cp-ctnet@mail.nih.gov, and we look forward to any questions you may have in the future. So that finishes my presentation, and I think we can move on to the question and answer period.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Szabo. Some questions from our audience, as well as questions that were submitted in advance of today's webinar. As a reminder, you can type your questions in by using the Q&A or chat box and selecting all panelists. And with that, we'll turn it over to you, Ava, to get us kicked off.
Okay, so I thank everyone who sent questions, and we have 21 of them, some of which overlap somewhat. So I'm going to go through those questions right now. So first, does the DMACC have to be associated with one of the CP-CTNet clinical sites, or can it be a standalone data coordination center? Actually, since it needs to be separate from the CP-CTNet site, it should not be affiliated with any of the UG1 sites. However, I want to stress again that the same institution can apply to both, but there be complete separation and separate investigator teams. Now, can you clarify if a center can apply for the DMACC grant if they have not previously been involved as a DMACC but have experience through NCTN and/or NCORE DCP? So it is not a requirement to have served as a DMACC previously. The other project information, the applicants are asked to list their prior data management, auditing, and multi-site coordination projects. So you will need to provide adequate information about your capabilities and track record and your experience through other programs, even if it's not exactly as a data management coordinating center. 3, since the chosen is metadata rave, does it mean that the DMACC must have a team working on metadata rave already? For the sites that already have a metadata rave running, not only do they have experience, but they also have a site license. For sites without metadata rave, well, it'll be more expensive too. So the DI will provide a site license. The team doesn't necessarily have to have had experience with metadata rave, but they do need to have had experience with data management. Or, for the clinical trial auditing, is it acceptable to contract out to a third-party company? And the answer is yes, but we want to know the group's track record and a very clear process and milestones for oversight of such a contractor. Question 5, what are DMACC roles in study design, protocol development, data analyses, and study finding interpretation? SEC is intended to be very collaborative and advisory to the UG1s with respect to study design and protocol development. For cooperative studies that will be developed across the UG1 sites, it's expected that the DMACC will have a primary statistical role, development and analysis and interpretation. The committee, which will include DMACC investigators, will also have oversight of agent selection and developmental pathways. DMACC will be asked to review all letters of intent and will have an advisory role in protocol development. The ones may consult with the DMACC to ensure that this approach is appropriate for data capture and reporting even prior to LOI submission. 6. Could a joint statistical collaboration model be acceptable, wherein the primary statistician could be outside the DMACC, but the DMACC statistician would then jointly be responsible for the statistical leadership for the trial? The answer again is that the DMACC statisticians will be expected to have an advisory role in protocol development, working with the primary statisticians for each trial. This will be a collaborative effort, and for the cross-network trials, the DMACC statisticians will be expected to have a primary role in study development. If the individual sites are providing the scientific leadership in the development conduct and data analysis, please clarify what it means for the DMACC to provide expertise. And so this is what I just discussed in the 2 prior questions. 8, based on our understanding, the CP-CTNet comprises 5 sites which will be covered by the companion FOA, RFA CA 18029. To ensure that we are understanding this correctly, please confirm that there will be 5 consortia funded, or 5 groups funded. So it is our NCI's intent to fund 5 sites, but the ultimate funding plan will depend on the applications and scores received. We do anticipate funding more than 5 sites. On average, how many trials do we expect the CP-CTNet sites to activate per year? Each is expected to activate 1 to 3 new trials per year. Thus, 5 to 15 new trials will be activated per year across the entire network. Question 10, are applicants required to host an instance of metadata Rave? If not, can Rave be hosted by metadata, or will NCI host it? So Rave will actually be hosted by metadata. 11, NCI negotiate Rave license costs for this program with metadata, or should applicants include the costs resulting from their own negotiations with metadata? The answer to this question is that NCI has negotiated Rave license costs. However, the DMACC will be responsible for negotiating professional services costs directly with metadata. These services may include study build, training, reporting, patching local URLs, etc. We encourage sites to have prior Rave experienced personnel to minimize professional service costs, but they're not a requirement. Question 12, under section 4.2, content and form of application submissions, the subsection entitled DMACC functional units, the FAA states that costs for hosting, maintaining, and providing round-the-clock access for an instance of metadata Rave as a clinical data management system of record, and then specifications for CDMS will be provided by the NCI. Please clarify, given that metadata provides these services when Rave is hosted by them. So the answer is that metadata will provide hosting and maintenance of Rave. The DMACC will be responsible for professional services needed to operationalize the DMACC's Rave URL, for instance, the study build, training, reporting, patching local URL, etc. And we do encourage prior Rave experience to minimize costs. Will D issue a new set of DCP SOPs that will drive the operations for the CP-CTNet as DCP did for the Consortia 2012 program? If yes, will DMACC be responsible for updating these new SOPs? If yes, who will host them and where for public access? So the answer is no, the DMACC will be responsible for the new revised SOPs, and the DMACC will work with NCI staff to make SOPs available for public access when applicable. 13, under Research Strategy, subsection D, the Administrative and Coordinating Unit, the second bullet, quote, develop maintenance of documents such as the DMACC Manual of Operations, CP-CTNet operating procedures, website content for CP-CTNet, and other procedural documents and materials, end of quote. Will the, quote, website content for CP-CTNet, end of quote, be hosted at DCP's current website, or will the applicant need to host it in another to-be-developed website? The DMACC's Manual of Operations, CP-CTNet standard operating procedures, website content for CP-CTNet, and other procedural documents and materials will be hosted available via the current DCP website, which is prevention.cancer.gov. Question 15. On resource sharing plan, the last bullet states, quote, the data sharing plan is also expected to address procedures ensuring that claims of agent efficacy are accurate and reliable, for instance, by establishing an independent response review panel, end of quote. Clarify, does this involve replication of the statistical analysis conducted by the LAOs that generate the conclusions reflected in manuscripts? Also, does parentheses mean that the applicant needs to describe how we are going to set up adjudication committees? Finally, should this be articulated in the data sharing plan, the research plan? Replication of statistical analyses is not expected. The procedures for ensuring accuracy and reliability should be articulated in the data sharing plan as requested. Question. In multiple sections, there's reference to biostatistics, but there's no requirement for statistical analysis. Clarify and address these previously with regard to the cross-consortia studies and the advisory role that statisticians are expected to have in protocol development. 19, the RFA mandates use of metadata Rave for CDMS. However, over the 5-year grant cycle, with 5 sites each running 1 to 3 small trials per year of accrual approximately 40 participants per year, et cetera, the overall number of participants recruited will not be large. Why use such expensive technology? The answer is that while there are numerous CDMS products, NCI awarded Metadata a contract to provide CDMS services to NCI's clinical research programs. Metadata was selected for several reasons, but mainly for its economy of scale and ability to manage trials with large participation from multiple sites. In an NCI feels, the use of common CDMS is both efficient and cost-effective. From the aspect of, quote, one tool, one way, end of quote, allowing for the development of best practices to be deployed across NCI-funded clinical trials. Savings are obtained from developing system integrations one time with other NCI products and tools. In other words, no need to reinvent the wheel for CDMS of choice. We're at the end, not quite. Question 18, is there a specific software platform mandated for use with a virtual biospecimen repository also? The answer is no. Question 19, the RFA states, quote, costs for hosting, maintaining, and providing around-the-clock access for the instance of metadata RAVE as the CDMS of record, et cetera. Please provide additional detail on what the license and specifications for the CMS will be provided by the NCI means. So the answer is NCI has a hosting and maintenance contract with metadata for the RAVE application. Metadata will provide a URL instance of RAVE for DMACC use. The DMACC will be responsible for professional services to operate RAVE, i.e., build, training, reporting, integration, patching local URL, etc. And we encourage sites to have proper RAVE experienced personnel to minimize professional services costs, but this is not required. Question 20, will the DMACC serve as a central data repository for all CP-CTNet data, including all analytic results data? The answer is actually yes and no. The DMACC will serve as a central data repository for all CP-CTNet data managed in RAVE as a database of record. However, the G1 grantees are responsible for statistical analysis and analytic results. There is no requirement that such data must be housed at the DMACC. And the last question we have is, can you explain how ongoing data management and auditing will be handled centrally at the coordinating center or by participating sites? So auditing will be handled by the DMACC. The data management is a somewhat shared process with a database of record at the DMACC, but actually data entry and QA/QC being performed by the UG1 grantees, the AOs, and such. And so that covers the questions that we received prior to this webinar. And I'm awaiting the new questions.
So we have received questions online. So I am going to ask the questions, and Eva is going to answer them. And so actually the first question is very similar to the question that you last answered, and that is, I assume the data entry will be done by the clinical sites. The DMACC will be responsible for monitoring the data quality. Will the DMACC be responsible to monitor the data quality, including timeliness, accuracy, and deficiency, etc.?
Okay, the data entry performed by clinical sites is our preferred method. Monitoring of the data will be joint responsibility of the LAO and the DMACC. That's monitoring of the data. That's not monitoring of the sites. Query be generated by the LAO during QA/QC or by DMACC because of timeliness or edits that can be programmed into the data management system. The DMACC is ultimately responsible for data quality.
Okay. Question. Can the auditing function be contracted to an outside commercial company? This question was also previously asked, but there's an add-on. Since the cost is closely related to the frequency and volume, is there a mechanism of supplemental funding if the activities are much more than budgeted?
So yes, this can be contracted to an outside company. The best estimate should be used to determine the budget based on the auditing plan in the RFA. How DCP acknowledges that auditing will depend on the trials approved and the number of AOs involved. Auditing can be used to reduce costs as necessary. And we'll do our best to ensure that the proper auditing can be performed.
All right, question. Could you say more about the virtual biospecimen inventory system? Could you give an example?
So is to have an online system that tracks the number and types of samples available at the different sites from the studies conducted. I think many sites do that in the current system, but we are not asking that the DMACC house the biospecimens, only knowledge of what the specimens are and where they are located.
Next one, is the DMACC expected to develop a website, new, or just provide content as per the RFA?
So currently under discussion, we will place the answer in the FAQ document on the DCP CP-CTNet website.
The next question, can you describe the metadata rave system a bit more? Is it a clinical trial management system or a data capture system or both?
MetaRave is both a capture data, is both a system that captures data and allows for data management.
Next question, will the SIVs be run by the DMACC?
So the study initiation visits are a trial-specific function, and this will be the role of the CP-CTNet site for the LAO staff.
Will the DMACC be responsible for all data queries?
So queries may be generated by the AO during QA/QC or by the DMACC because of timeliness or edits that can be programmed into the data management system. The DMACC is responsible for data queries generated by the DMACC.
One additional question come in, which I will read, but it's actually the same question that we already just answered, and that is, could you please elaborate on the role of the DMACC in maintaining a virtual biospecimen inventory system? Where is the system located?
Inventory system would be located at the DMACC, but the specimens themselves will not be in the DMACC.
That's a lot of the questions we've received so far. I know many of you submitted questions in advance. Please feel free to continue to submit your questions as we will keep the chat and the Q&A box open. I do want to remind everybody that if you do have specific questions about your grant application, please feel free to contact the email that is on your screen. Additionally, we will have the recording, the slide deck, and a list of all the FAQs we've received today and in advance posted on the website in the near future. And that link is also available on the screen right now. Give a couple more minutes for everyone to kind of pose their questions, and hopefully a lot of the questions we've had have ones that you might have had in your head leading up to this webinar.
For additional questions, I want to thank everybody for participating and for your interest. We are very excited about this new program and look forward to some very interesting and innovative clinical trials and making a difference.
A few more questions that have come in. The next question is, can NCI systems such as Open be used for CP-CTNet studies?
So currently exploring the use of such systems. Cannot guarantee that we will use them.
The next, since they have LMS, is the specimen tracking system required to provide label printing, scanning capabilities or not?
No. We'll just say no.
Yeah. Who is responsible for SAEs?
That site-specific stability. The sites where the SAE occurs needs to submit both to the AO and to DCP as in a timely manner, as is a normal practice.
And ultimately, the reporting of the SAEs to the FDA will depend on who is the sponsor of the FDA.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
What does QA/QC by LAO entail?
Working
QA/QC by the LAO. Well, they can query their AOs regarding system data or conflicts or concerns, something that's not clear, et cetera. They have that responsibility to sort of clean that prior to it being submitted to the entry into rate.
In the process as it's being entered into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that question about the specimen tracking. So sites have laboratory information management system. Is specimen tracking system required to provide label printing, scanning capabilities or not? Answer to this is no. This is a virtual biorepository. All right, question is, metadata RAID can also host imaging and omics data. Will the DMACC be responsible for capture and hosting of this type of generated data?
That remains to be determined.
Depending on the
Yeah, it will depend on the studies and how things go.
The next question is, will you be working with CCIA?
Working with a contractor to help us out, a regulatory contractor.
The next question is, to avoid duplicate data entry, should we assume that the AOs will export data from their information management systems, the specimen tracking system, as opposed to taking the inventory into the tracking system?
I think that a system that is most likely to type issues is preferable. So yes, that would be the preferable way to go.
So we'll give you a minute or two to see if there are any last-minute questions that our responses have generated.
And again, is that if we did not answer your question fully, or you have additional questions, go ahead and email them to the CP-CTNet staff email, and they will show up in the FAQs, and we will try to make the FAQs user-friendly so that the days that new updates occur will be obvious, so you don't have to go through all the questions to find the new ones.
One more.
Okay.
You mentioned in the previous call that randomization is to be determined. Does this mean that balance is not a required metadata tool at this time?
Yeah, correct. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for, again, your questions submitted in advance, as well as the questions we've received during the webinar. As a reminder, everything will be posted online within the next few weeks. And with that, thank you again for your participation.
Yes, you for your interest.